Vincent Krivda is with us, and he's got a book called The Greatest Story Never Told. Wait till you hear his story and what this is about. And I love the title because it is so apropos to what we're talking about. So, Vincent, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you, Kate, for inviting me to meet with your audience. This is an exciting day for me.
So let's talk about the book. What's the book about? I love the title. It's very provocative in a good way.
Thank you. Well, we know that the Bible evolved from what is called the oral tradition to a written form. The book both describes and outlines what those stories would have sounded like and meant to the original audiences, because they were told in family settings within the mishpachah, where everyone would enjoy a meal and tell tales. And so you got to ask yourself, well, why is that important? What I'm suggesting is if we consider how those stories were told and sounded like to the original audience, it will change the way we view the messages in the Bible. Our Creator designed the Bible not to serve as this vehicle for instructional compliance. It's not a book of answers. Instead, it teaches us how to ask questions. And it teaches us to ask those questions relevant to each generation, because each generation experiences something different and searches for meaning all on their own terms. And most importantly, though, it teaches us the problems that we encounter and how we're to interact and relate with others, and remind us of how we should live in this present world.
What did you find out, Vincent, about writing this book that surprised you?
I think the biggest part, because I come from a very, very strict religious upbringing, the Torah and the Bible does not answer questions. Instead, it really directs us to ask questions. And those questions we ask put our Creator on trial. Now, that's not an irreligious perspective. The mother who has suffered through birth with a baby born with hypoplastic left heart syndrome is absolutely justified in questioning the extent to which her Creator has forgotten both her and her child. The boy, born with Duchenne muscular dystrophy, knows he's been handed a death sentence and that the muscles of his heart will eventually expire. The Torah facilitates our ability to question why. It places God on trial, and it also teaches us how to work out how we must live in this present world.
And again, we're speaking with Vincent Krivda, and the name of the book is The Greatest Story Never Told. And once you get the book, you can go deeper into some of what we're talking about here. For example, we're going to talk about, your characterization of the creation story as a backdrop to promote messages of faith. And we can't dive too deep into this because we'll run out of time. But give us a little thumbnail of it. What brought you to that point of consideration?
So the creation account in Genesis is a spectacular ancient writing that still, even today, relates to us. Creation is depicted in a primordial water state, dominated by darkness, yet above all of those conditions rested the Spirit of God hovering over chaos. And when we begin to think about the past year and a half of this pandemic, this COVID pandemic, we're facing uncharted waters. We're facing fear. We're facing darkness. We're facing uncertainty. And most of all, chaos. At Oakstone Academy in Westerville, Ohio, we welcome back our students in August of 2020. But look at it from their perspective. Not only at Oakstone, but at academies and schools all throughout the globe, a senior class was entering their final year of required studies before they would embark on a lifetime adventure, I challenged my students to consider this. They could either live in darkness and fear, or they could embrace the storyline in Genesis. And that storyline, quite frankly, is very simple. The popular culture of that day promoted the idea that man was created to serve the gods. Marduk created man to serve the gods. That meant man was a fate supportive cast member who was required to daily dig out and create irrigation pathways for canals and scour the earth for food to survive. But the storyline in Genesis challenged that popular ideology. It taught that man was created to be fruitful, to multiply, to team with life, to dominate the earth and the beasts of the field. And when you hear that story, when that ear catches a hold of that message, my goodness, it's much different. Let me give a good example. Genesis 1 and 3. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw the light that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and darkness he called night, and there was evening and morning on the first day. Meanwhile, back on the ranch, the story progresses. In the 6th chapter, God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of waters." And for years, Kate, I didn't even know what a firmament was. "And let it divide the waters from the waters." The Hebrew word for firmament is a word that describes a beaten metal plate. So you can easily imagine, as the story was being told, it required dramatic acting. Your favorite uncle would pretend to beat down a metal plate as he was describing how the primordial waters were all separated. But then, on day 1, light was created. On day 2, a metal plate was constructed as a barrier. But then on day 4, the sun, the moons, the stars were created to regulate days, seasons, months, and years. Now, this story required the audience to ask questions. So what kind of questions would have been asked? What was the light created by God on day 1? Why did darkness hover over the face of the deep and not light? Did God create darkness? Did God create evil conditions evident in the world? If God created those evil conditions, then what purpose do those conditions serve? Now, there's another great story in that 1st chapter, because I kind of separate these out in my book. The creation of man. Peculiar words are used in this description. And God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him, male and female created he them. Now, the word for man is not the traditional word that's used. The traditional word for man is ish. The word zakar is used. And that could be a verb, which means to remember, or it could mean man. A most logical conversation after that story would have unfolded would have been something like this. What does God want man to remember? That conversation at that point could go anywhere. After dinner, we've got time. Must we remember that we are created in the image of God? And if so, how should we treat others? What will happen to me after I die if I'm created in the image of God? Why are some born to riches and wealth while others seemingly are mired in poverty and misery? But the most important question, does God remember me? Because isn't that what it's all about?
Yeah, absolutely. We could talk all day about this. I don't want to run out of time. We have about a minute left. And again, we're speaking with Vincent Krivda, The Greatest Story Never Told, Oral Tradition and the Development of Messages in the Bible. That's the other part of this. You can get it on Amazon, wherever great books are sold. What do you hope people take away from reading this book?
I want people to fall in love with the messages in the Bible. I worked in a corporate job for 37 years. I would wake up each morning, read the Bible to search for meaning in my own life. And the messages in the Bible are much different than what many of us have learned that what they are. I'm convinced you will find the characters that I've outlined in the Bible to be totally relatable to everyday life. And some of these stories would make Netflix blush. They include murder, betrayal, deceit, greed, corruption, but they inspire faith as the basis to connect with our Creator. And for that reason, this is the greatest story never told.
Wow, perfect place to wrap this up. Vincent Krivda, thanks so much.
Thank you, Kate.